In a world where everything has a price, Walter Blink, an elderly man, was involved in a traffic accident when he rammed his simple vehicle into a businessman's brand new luxury car. But what this young man revealed to the elderly man was worth every penny. On a rainy afternoon, the nearly 70-year-old gentleman sat in his old rocking chair, watching the news on TV. Meanwhile, his wife lay in bed, trying to sleep but suffering from a migraine. Mr. Walter noticed this and looked out the window, deciding to go out and buy medicine for his beloved wife despite the heavy rain. The man didn't like driving in the rain, but he resented seeing his wife in pain even more. So he changed his clothes, took his keys, and walked to the garage. He smiled fondly at his car, which he adored and cherished. "Even after all these years, you still look great," Mr. Walter said, touching the hood of his beloved car. The man is taken aback as he pulls out onto the road. The rain has stopped, making it easier for him to see where he is going. He lived in an old house on the side of a highway, so he had to drive a long distance to find a pharmacy. To avoid missing the news, the man leans over to turn a radio knob. And the worst happens in this moment of distraction. When the old man looks back at the road, he notices a car ahead of him and slams on the brakes. His old car and the wet road, however, could not keep him from colliding with the rear of the vehicle in front of him. A terrible, thunderous, metallic sound echoes. Mr. Walter regains consciousness and realizes that his mistake was even bigger than he had previously thought. He had collided with a modern luxury vehicle, the kind that only soccer players and important businessmen own. He opens the door and walks in to assess the damage, already knowing that he would have to work until the end of his life to pay for it. The door of the luxury vehicle opens at that exact moment, and a tall man dressed in a fine suit and impeccable hairstyle steps out. He begins to assess the damage, ignoring the old man, frowns as if worried, and pulls out his cell phone. He starts taking pictures of all the dents and eventually speaks to the old man. He requests his phone number and driver's license. He returns the documents and tells him to go back home and wait for him to reach him, indicating that he will look for the elderly man. Then, without saying goodbye, he got into his luxurious vehicle and drove off down the highway. Mr. Walter walked back to his humble car, which had a nice dent in the front and a broken headlight. The old man's eyes welled up with tears, and his heart skipped a beat as he calculated how much he would have to pay to repair all the damage. Nonetheless, he drove slowly to the pharmacy to pick up his wife's medication. When he arrived at the drugstore, he realized he had hurt his head and had not even realized it. The pharmacist helped the elderly man in cleaning up the dried blood and apply a bandage to the wound. Mr. Walter returned home depressed after he was advised to apply constant ice to reduce swelling. His wife woke up the next morning and immediately inquired as to why her husband took so long. She dozed off and couldn't wait for the medicine, but when she noticed the band around her husband's head, she asked what had happened. She began to cry before she even heard his response, not only because she saw Mr. Walter in that state, but also because she remembered another tragic accident, reliving the traumatic memories of a day that will never be forgotten. The woman had lost her son, Vitor, 15 years before in an unusual situation similar to this one. The young boy, who had always enjoyed playing with his toy airplanes and helicopters, had only one ambition. He wanted to be a helicopter pilot. He studied for the difficult exams, and his parents were extremely supportive, spending a large sum of money to pay for his courses and the flying hours of the practical classes, and not holding anything back in terms of his education. But it was all worth the effort when they learned that their son had been accepted in first place for the pilot's course, and he didn't want to fly just any aircraft. As a rescue pilot, he wished to help people in times of need. Vitor was brave and quickly rose to the top of his platoon, being assigned to the most difficult and dangerous missions. Mr. Walter and his wife were proud of their son for growing up and saving lives, but they couldn't help but worry about his safety. With his high salary, the young man soon began buying expensive specialty items for his parents. He would always show up at the old house with exotic spices for his mother and souvenirs from his travels for his father. But without a doubt, the most special gift he gave to Mr. Walter was an old classic car. Because he was so happy and emotional, the old man couldn't even find the words to thank him. He hugged his son tightly and expressed his love and pride in him, not for the gift, but for the amazing person he had become. Mr. Walter always took good care of the vehicle and enjoyed answering questions about it, so he could proudly say, "My son gave it to me." After all, cars had always been his greatest passion, but he'd never been able to afford one. At the time, life appeared to be simple, but as if a new chapter in a book were about to begin, Vitor was summoned to a perilous mission. The helicopter took off well, but its engine failed, forcing him to perform some risky maneuvers to land it in an open field. Mr. Walter became desperate as a result, and when he met Vitor, he practically begged him to switch to a less risky flight category. But the young man refused, claiming that he wanted to take on missions that no one else was willing to take on. They had a big argument, and they couldn't agree on anything after that. Lunches and family gatherings were always fraught with conflict, creating an ominous atmosphere and undermining the relationship further. The elderly man became increasingly concerned as time passed, particularly when news of a serious accident was broadcast on television. He knew his son's missions were noble, but he couldn't take it anymore. In one argument, Mr. Walter went overboard, looked his son in the eye and said, "I regret having supported you all these years, helping you pay for your courses. And now I'm asking you for something, and you're saying no. You are ungrateful. Here's the key to the car you gave me, and I'm returning it to you because driving it, in some ways, encourages you to take the risks you do." The young man was furious and stormed out of the house, refusing to retrieve the car. If only they had known this was going to be their last conversation, things might have turned out differently. That same day, Vitor woke up in the early morning hours to a call on his cell phone informing him that a serious accident had happened on a bridge and that a family needed to be rescued and taken to the hospital as soon as possible. He was ready and on his way to the site within 5 minutes. He arrived at the scene and successfully rescued the victims, but when he arrived at the hospital, a terrible storm with high winds caused him to lose his vision and crash the helicopter. In a stroke of bad luck, Mr. Walter and his wife lost their only son. The boy did not survive. Only 3 people survived the crash, 2 family members and the co-pilot. After remembering all of this, the elderly couple tried to find the strength to carry on with their day, knowing that they now had a massive debt as a result of the car accident, which would take decades to pay off with only Mr. Walter's job. He considered selling the car, but aside from the fact that it was insufficient, the car had far greater sentimental value. After all, it was one of his son's few memories. The two were interrupted by a loud knock on the door before the woman, who was already in tears, could hear her husband's words of comfort. With a startled look at her husband, the woman went to open it, and there stood a tall, important-looking man. The old man immediately recognized him as the driver of the luxury vehicle and was bracing himself for the massive bill he would have to foot. However, the man appeared to be happy and confident. The wife offered the chic young man a cup of coffee, who sat down on the sofa, looked at the gentleman as if he had something stuck in his throat, and immediately began to speak. "Mr. Walter, we have finally met. I've been looking for you for years." The old man is surprised and agitated to hear this, and he quickly gets up from the couch to inquire as to what this is all about. Mr. Walter, noticing that he is staring directly at a picture of his son in a beautiful frame, asks if the mysterious man knows him, and he receives an answer that will forever change his life. "Naturally, I did. I didn't just know him. I was his best friend and co-pilot." When he hears that, the elderly man loses his strength and slumps back on the couch. The boy's name was Gordon, and he was the co-pilot of the couple's son during the tragic accident. They'd been best friends since they were training to be first responders, and they were always together. The weather on the day of the accident, according to Gordon, was terrible, but the two decided to fly to try to save that family, who would die if they didn't get help as soon as possible. He claims it was the most difficult mission he had ever undertaken, and that if he hadn't had someone as capable as their son, he would not have survived. "He was a true hero and the greatest pilot I've ever seen," said Gordon, who severely injured one of his hands, rendering him unable to fly for the rest of his life. As a result, he spent months in the hospital and years in physical therapy. With this, he made the decision to enter the financial market. He ended up being more successful than expected, earning enough money to purchase the luxurious car he was driving when he ran into Mr. Walter again. The elderly couple's eyes welled up with tears after hearing Gordon's story, but they were cut off by the young man before they could get any more emotional. Vitor and I were aware of the danger we were putting ourselves in, so we prepared letters to be delivered to our loved ones in the event of an accident. Here it is. Mr. Walter took the envelope and stood there motionless, only wanting to hug Gordon tightly, as if he were an angel who had brought a message from his deceased son. Mr. Walter read the letter from his son after they said their goodbyes that night, and it was impossible to hold back tears. As he finished, he knew his son was smiling and looking down at him. For the first time in many years, the peace in his heart allowed him to sleep soundly, and he had a beautiful dream about his son. Some believe that the car accident was entirely the result of fate. If you like this story, please leave a like, and this other video that is appearing on the screen now will probably move you as well. Have a good day and see you in the next video.